I'd like to call the March 27, 2023 Planning Commission special meeting to order. The Planning Commission is holding hybrid meetings. Members of the public can attend the meeting in person or observe the meeting on Zoom on Access Humboldt Channel 10, online by visiting www.cityofarcata.org and following the live meetings link at the bottom of the city's homepage, or on the city's YouTube channel. If you are attending remotely, please be aware that the Zoom feed provides the closest to real-time stream. If you rely on the other feeds and you wish to make comments, please be aware of the time lag on those feeds. The first item on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. The City of Arcata acknowledges that the lands we are located on are the unceded ancestral lands of the Wiyot tribe. The land that Arcata rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Gudini, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The City of Arcata acknowledges the Wiyot community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement seeks to aid in dismantling the legacy narratives of settler colonialism. Next is roll call. Staff, will you please call roll?
Yeah, Chair Davies,
Here.
Vice Chair Tagney,
Here.
Commissioner Figueroa,
Here.
Commissioner Mayer,
Here.
Commissioner Lehman,
Here.
and Commissioner Simmons.
Here.
We're joined tonight by Community Development Department staff, Director David Loya and Joe Mateer, Senior Planner. Next, we have oral communications. During this time, people may make comments about items that are not on the agenda. If you have comments about items that are listed on our agenda for tonight, please hold them until the Commission opens public comment on those items. At the end of oral and written communications, Commissioners may respond to commenters. Any request that requires Commission action may be set by the Commission for a future agenda or referred to staff. I will start with those in the room, then we'll hear from those on Zoom. Please line up now if you wish to speak. I'd like to get a sense for how many oral communications we have. Please line up behind the lectern. If you are on Zoom and you wish to make oral communications on matters that are not on tonight's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen or by pressing *9 if you are calling in by Zoom. For those on Zoom, when it is your turn to speak, the clerk will unmute you. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to comment. Those in the room may track their time using the clock on the dais. Recognizing that speakers on Zoom may not see the timer and may not be able to tell when 3 minutes have lapsed, I apologize in advance if your comment is interrupted at 3 minutes. Feel free to state your name for the record. May we have the first speaker, please?
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify, because I know we have some speakers here who might be interested to speak on the land use element component. So I just wanted to make sure that folks realize that this is for items that are not on the agenda. So if you wanted to speak on the land use, that agenda item will be coming up shortly.
Thanks for that.
Can I ask a question, David? I did want to speak on the Craftsman's Mall area and the land use there, and it didn't appear from the agenda as if that was actually going to be dealt with this evening.
Yeah, this is the land use element along with the land use changes, designation changes that are proposed in the land use element will be discussed tonight.
Okay, I thought it was more a general meeting on your policy and how you're dealing with things.
The whole thing, yeah.
Okay, so I got to wait till that comes up. Thank you.
Good evening. Last city council meeting, some surprises there.
Number one, Arcata's unfunded accrued liability pension is at 29.61 million. Outside of the pension, the city has a 3.3 million remaining debt. The budget for the city of Arcata expenditures were 79 million with a shortfall of 13.8 million. The wastewater funding in the next 3 years is $62 million. I believe when I was at the city council meeting when they approved phase one, that was 42 million. So it'd be nice if some of you guys started asking questions about the wastewater treatment plant, because I've been bringing this up for quite a long, so if somebody could explain that. The other thing that came up was they needed money for a street sweeper. That's been out of operation for a while. That was pre-COVID, no street sweeper, COVID, no street sweeper. Then they got it together and started having a street sweeper, and then I called on that a number of times, because even though they had a street sweeper, there's lots of cars that are on the street where garbage is between the cars and the curb. So that all ends up down into our creeks, our wetlands. It goes out to the Pacific. That's why we have, like, you know, twice the size of Texas out there of a big mess. So that's under your California State Water Quality Board, North Coast Regional Quality Board. So it's, you know, stormwater pollution prevention plan. So be nice if somebody paid attention to that. And all the times that I called, they acted like it was really not that much as far as what was going into our creeks. And I'll remind you, because of the ambassador program, which was just basically a program to help the police, they reported to the council that they had collected 8 tons of trash. So that's 8 tons of trash that would have been going into our creeks or wetlands and out in the ocean. So you can imagine over the years how much that might have been. Maybe it's 100 tons that have been gone. I mean, I think Eureka has some statistics on how much they've collected with a program they had, picking all that up. The governor he has announced that there's significant budget slashes to protect the coast by 43%. The cuts are part of the nuisance proposed $6 million in reduction to the California Climate Change Program. That's all things that are affecting us here. That was basically, California has a $22.5 billion deficit. This is all stuff I brought up to the city council along with the federal at 33 trillion. So we need to have answers to these.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening, Patricia Combianica. There was a kind of concerning incident last Planning Commission meeting. There's been some concerns of other past transparency issues. And what happened was you guys were viewing the screen here, and it wasn't being posted on our screen. And it was more of a concern for those people that are watching from home. So I'm kind of asking, if you're discussing something, a document on this screen, that it's always posted on this screen. Joe Matera was really gracious enough to go back and ask Dylan to post it on this machine or this screen here for the home viewers and us in the audience. And we were told by Dylan, Joe said that Dylan said that there was too much text, so it would be really hard to see on that screen. Well, that's kind of the glory of modern technology. You can enlarge that so we can see it later on in the video. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of concerning that somebody, the IT, made that decision. And it really kind of confirms this, you know, transparency, loosey-goosey things. So anyways, from now on, I'd really like to see that always on the screen. I was getting texts from people at home that were saying that they couldn't see what document you guys were talking about. So anyways, thanks a lot.
Thank you for your comments.
James Becker, I'd like to cede my time to Fred Wise.
Thank you. I don't think I'm going to need 6 minutes, but I don't know. Some of this I've said before, some is new. First, I request that every document have a date and title on the document. Without that, we don't know whether something is revised or old or new. Second, I'd like to have in writing whether every element that is not on the schedule is considered to have been completed by the Planning Commission. We have this fast-paced schedule in front of us, but it doesn't include all the elements of the general plan or all the chapters of the Gateway Plan. There's been no votes on these elements, and if they're considered to be completed, it's fine with me, but it should be in writing. It should be very clear. I'd like to know whether the housing element is considered to be completed. It shows a population of Arcata by the year 2027 of 20,000 people, whether that's going to be revised or that will stand as is. Can we get a table that shows where we are in the progress of the Gateway Plan and General Plan? Not just the schedule. The schedule that's listed I consider to be absolutely impossible to complete. But so I'd like to see something further on that. I have to be careful here how I say this. I'm very much in favor of an accelerated progress on getting these things done. From my point of view, from the audience, it's been excruciating over these last 14 months. And everyone has said it in each of your ways. We've been talking about discussing what there is to be discussed. However, I think that the plan that was outlined at the last session is not feasible for a variety of reasons. One is, from my point of view, and I strongly suggest you talk to the city attorney about this, it's a strong violation of the Brown Act. I'm going to quote, individual briefings of a majority of members of legislative bodies should be unidirectional. That is, they should not go from the commission to staff and back to the commission. Otherwise, multiple members could separately give staff direction, causing staff to shape or modify its ultimate recommendations, resulting in action outside of a meeting. Staff cannot volunteer the views of another member, and the member providing his views should be absolutely clear to the staff that is not discussing the matter with the quorum of the legislative body. Clearly, what you've got in front of you is dependent on that process, as we've seen in what came out, the items that we're going to be discussing later this evening. I have an idea how this can be done without a violation of the Brown Act that I'd be happy to discuss. But the way it is now, I think it's completely untenable. Similarly, it's not the only thing that has been violation of the Brown Act, but this is the single largest thing that we're seeing right now, right in front of us. It's not okay with the public. It's not okay with the state law. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments. Do we have any speakers online?
We do, and we are going to attempt to bring them in through my microphone. We're having some technical difficulties, and the speaker that you generally rely on is not operating right now, so I'm going to try and mic their voice through the mic. So a little bit of an experiment here. Go ahead, Jane. Oh, hold on one second. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jane.
Good evening. As I requested at the February 28th meeting in order to address the L Street, pardon me? Did somebody say something? Oh dear. Can you hear me? Hello?
Hey, hang tight. Do we have any? No. Okay, Jane, I'm going to try this one more time. I'm trying to mic you in because we're having technical difficulties, so please bear with me. Go ahead. You know what? Turn your mic off, please. I'm sorry. Turn your audio off. Leave your mic on. Turn your sound down. And then speak when you're ready.
turn my mic off?
No, turn your audio down. It seems to be working now. Go ahead and try.
I'll turn it down. Not as loud, is that it?
You're working fine. Can folks in the audience hear this? Okay. You're perfect. Ready, set, go.
Perfection is nice.
Okay.
I did send my public comment directly to you, David, for distribution. I don't know if they received it. Did they?
Jane, go ahead and complete.
Okay.
You have 3 minutes.
As I requested at the February 28th meeting, to address the L Street choices, I think it's necessary to lay out a visual representation of what L Street would look like, either as a one-way street or as a linear park with surrounding building options. I think that would make it both for the Planning Commission and the public to visualize each option and make an informed decision. None of the 3 current options presented about L Street at the last meeting accurately presents the Transportation Safety Committee's actual recommendation. Why hasn't the city done this alternative plan or had a thorough discussion of L Street as a linear park? It's just been ignored, and why have the Transportation Safety Committee's recommendations been ignored? Will you give the committee's chair, Dave Ryan, an opportunity to present the committee's recommendations in person to the commission? Why is the 2010 L Street Vision Report not being discussed? I don't believe the city owns all the property required to create L Street as a one-way street and has stated that it doesn't plan to use eminent domain in the area. How does the city plan to address this issue? Also, the Great Redwood Trail Authority now has jurisdiction over the railroad's right-of-way along L Street. Have they been consulted in terms of making L Street a one-way street? And if so, have they agreed with the city's plan? Isn't that an important thing to do? It's a goal of the city to make the gateway area bike and pedestrian friendly. Why not take advantage of an existing linear path and develop it into a public park to be used by bicyclists and pedestrians as an alternative to using K Street? It goes throughout the gateway area. Why are we proposing there will be lots of additional traffic on K Street if we're encouraging and planning for less vehicle traffic? If the bicycle and pedestrian traffic from K Street is directed toward L Street, major space of it can potentially be removed from the K Street plan. Thank you for consideration of these ideas. I hope you will address them.
Thanks, Jane. That's all we have online.
Would any commissioner like to respond to any of the comments? Sounds like a feedback loop. Would any commissioners like to respond to any of the comments we heard this evening? Judith?
Yeah, thank you to everyone who was commenting. First, going last first, yeah, I would also greatly appreciate responses to the questions that Jane Woodward put forward, and also I'd like us to consider the comment that Fred Weiss made about the, I'm assuming you were talking about the summary material that Director Loya put together and sent out prior to the meeting that chose items from material that planning commissioners had sent in. I was concerned about that summary and in some case reorganization with some deletions, at least looking at my material as an example. And it would be good to have some means of doing this that would not violate the Brown Act. And I'd like some thought to go into that as well. Much as I appreciated having the summary, I do understand the two-way communication, so maybe the director could say something about that, and we could all think through some means of communicating within our meetings and within the Brown Act. And thank you to everyone else who came in and commented as well.
The Transportation Safety Committee is reviewing the circulation element, and you're going to be reviewing it as well in just a couple of weeks here. It's on it's on the docket coming up for your meetings for discussion. You'll be looking at the mobility section as well as the circulation. All of the comments have been carried forward from the Transportation Safety Committee, and will continue to do so. In terms of the Brown Act, I am not aware of any Brown Act violations. I'm in constant communication with our city attorney. If any are discovered, we'll correct those procedural missteps if they come to light.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Dan?
I look forward to a robust conversation and decision on the circulation element, and as well as more specifically the K and L Street discussion. I don't think any of us do, that we've settled that or concluded or have enough information yet. So I'm really looking forward to it and glad it's coming up soon.
No other comments from commissioners. I would like to move to the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are considered routine and are adopted in one motion without discussion. If anyone would like to discuss an item, it will be removed from consent and considered under item 4 on our agenda. We have one consent calendar item tonight, which is approve Planning Commission minutes from our regular meeting, March 14th, 2023. I would like to pull the minutes from consent and take them up under item number 4, which I will open now. Reviewing minutes, I would like minutes amended to reflect the following changes. First, oral communications. Please note that we had 4 speakers. 2, under business item A, please move the statement public comment was heard to the first line, indicating that public comment was heard from 4 members of the public on both items. Also under business item A, under the vote for each of the topics under the agenda item, Simmons is listed as absent instead of Lehman. Please correct. And lastly, business item B, please update to reflect that there were 6 speakers. Are there any other suggestions for edits by planning commissioners? Anybody else have anything for the minutes? If not, can I have a motion to adopt as amended? We'll take public comment shortly, not now.
I move to approve the consent calendar as amended.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Can we have a vote?
I would offer that you take public comment just before the vote.
Okay, perfect. Then we will take public comment. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate your edits on there. I think that's helpful to show the amount of public speakers since everything's gotten to such a limited level. And I would just take this moment to just suggest, although this decision's been made, and I'm sure it'll probably be another planning commission that changes it, but I do believe there is value in having a limited description of what's said by the public in this forum. And that's the only thing I would add. I feel that it was a little bit of a disservice to take that away, and that's just, I want to put my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Yes, thank you. A question or comment. Commissioner Lehman was absent. He had a letter that was referenced, and the letter contained both materials on business items A and B. I'd like to know whether Commissioner Lehman's letter should be made part of the minutes and how it should be referenced.
Thank you. David, do you want to speak to, does Peter's comments need to be addressed in a different way, or we're comfortable with how it is?
No, I don't think they need to be specifically referenced in the minutes in any way. These are action minutes. The Planning Commission has to have real specific action minutes. Commissioner Lehman's comments are part of the public record. They don't need to be part of the minutes per se.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Can we now take a vote on the motion to approve those minutes as amended? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Moving on to,
Just to make sure I get the record keeping correct, were there any abstentions or everyone voted aye?
I think unanimous. Our next item is, we have no public hearings this evening, so business items is next on our agenda this evening. We have one business item tonight, which is to consider a recommendation to the City Council on the general plan updates. Tonight, we will be taking up the land use element. The city noticed property owners whose land use designations had proposed changes about our last meeting. A few landowners came to the last meeting, but were not able to have their comments heard. We were not able to hear their comments. I'd like to make sure that they have an opportunity to speak to us tonight. To ensure that we get to their comments, I would like to open public comment on this agenda item before we hear our staff report, so that we have an opportunity to address their concerns and that staff can maybe respond if there's any specific questions in there. There will not be another public comment period on this topic, so if you have comment on the land use element or the vision statement, now is your opportunity to speak on these topics. I will open public comment now, and I will start with those in the room, then we'll hear from those on Zoom. Again, please line up now if you wish to speak. I'd like to get a sense for how many oral communications we have. Please line up behind the lectern. And if you are on Zoom and you wish to make oral communications on matters that are not on tonight's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen, or by pressing *9 if you are calling in by Zoom. For those on Zoom, when it is your turn to speak, the clerk will unmute you. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to comment. Those in the room may track their time using the clock on the dais. Recognizing that speakers on Zoom may not see the timer and may not be able to tell when the 3 minutes have lapsed, I apologize in advance if your comment is interrupted at 3 minutes. Ready for public comment?
Excuse me. Yeah, my name is Dave Meserve. I live on Grant Avenue. And I was a little bit upset, I'll have to say, to see that our neighborhood, I Street, Todd Court, and Grant Avenue had been included in the Craftsman's Mall neighborhood. It's, Craftsman's Mall, we know what's going to happen there. It's an industrial area which is going to get the 900-bed dorm. And then the area to the north of it is, kind of mixed industrial and open space and whatnot. And then I saw that the neighborhood down I Street was included in the Craftsman's Mall neighborhood, and that someone wants to change it from low density residential to high density residential. And that makes me look back at the plans that Strombeck submitted back in 2015 for right behind the tennis courts there at the end of Grant for a 78-unit apartment complex with 78 units in 2-story buildings and about 78 parking spaces too. No idea that nobody was going to have a car. And that just, I've lived there for close to, over 30 years now. It does not make sense for that neighborhood to be high-density residential. The most obvious problem is at the bottom of J Street by the traffic circle, where I invite you to go there and hang out for 15 or 20 minutes. And you'll see that all the neighbors know enough to look ahead and stop and pull over and let someone go through. There's not enough room for 2 cars to pass. Okay, take out a parking lane. Well, there's also not enough on-site parking for people there. So a major change would have to be made. Also, the whole neighborhood is, I don't want to sound too much like a NIMBY, but it's a very quiet neighborhood, and it has about 50 residences in it at this point, and to more than double that would just be crazy. Also, with SB 9 and the provisions there, it's quite possible to increase the density and get more housing in there. And right now, Strombeck could easily build 25 units or something like that on his 1.7 acres. So I ask you to consider and hopefully remove that from the Craftsman's Mall area. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments.
Good evening. My name is Mike Edwards, and I reside at 2395 I Street. Dave hit most of the things that I was going to mention tonight. And now that we know that the university is going to build at the end of the street, there are not sidewalks on both ends of the street. And one of the goals with that development is to have a walkable neighborhood and to have students be able to walk to HSU when weather permits. I'm under no illusions that when the university does go in, that both sides of I Street and Todd Court are probably all going to need to be turned into complete B zones so we don't wind up with a parking lot where we can't park in front of our own houses or remove our cars from our driveways when we want to have a guest come and park in our area. In addition, during COVID, one of the things I noticed was a drop off in the use of the Larson Park parking lot by the HSU students. And undoubtedly, they will rediscover the Larson Park parking lot and start to use it as university parking as they have in the past. I would also point out that on I Street, right there next to Larson Park, that area is frequently used by the public that wants to come and use Larson Park for bocce ball or tennis courts or a birthday party as soon as that very small parking lot fills up. The choke point at the entry to J Street is a little bit over 28 feet across. And tonight I measured between 2 parked cars on either side of J Street right at the opening, and there was 14 feet there. I'm concerned about the access for emergency vehicles. Frequently, as Dave mentions, you stop at one end of the street and make sure the street is clear ahead of you so that you can get down to the roundabout without having 2 cars. It's already a choke point to the neighborhood. I myself am a homeowner and own property on the parking lot and would like to enjoy my property as low density residential. And ultimately, I would like to put in an additional ADU on my property. My property is subdividable, but I don't think there's enough room for high density in there. This is my personal opinion, and I would like the city to re-examine that, particularly in light of the fact that HSU is building down the street the development that we asked to be downsized or reorganized or additional parking added to. That's fait accompli. So we have to roll with that now. And unfortunately, it falls upon you guys to help keep our neighborhood livable. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments.
My name is Patricia Cambianica, and I'm going to cede my time to Fred Wise. Thank you.
First, I want to say that there's a lot of good ideas in the suggested comments, even from people that I often think I disagree with, which brings up that many eyes and many minds are a good thing. which is why I think there should be no single person ministerial review in the Gateway Plan. You've received my 14 pages of notes, or 8 pages, so I'm going to go real quickly. The Arcata vision statement. Arcata says a modest growth rate up to a population of 27,000. I don't think that is modest. I think it's a false statement. It should be stricken. The idea of having affordable housing equitably distributed through the city, I think, is also a false statement. Should be stricken. Let me back up a second. What I look for are not so much planning ideas. I think there's a lot of good planning ideas up here. I look for what I call internal inconsistencies, things where the document says one thing in one place and a different thing in another place. And I look for things that I think that in case of a lawsuit could not be sustained. In terms of this document, no date, no title, it's the list that came out today, 12:30. The suggested consent approval for rezoning the Sunset District as a implementation measure, I think, should be removed from the conversation entirely. We can be covered at a later date. A lot of good ideas. The idea of having a chart that shows the residential, take out the ag land and make a chart. It'll show the amounts of residential much more clearly. We need a map of the infill areas because it's referred to. Parking, it's okay to have 0. It's okay to have a minimum, but not a maximum, in my opinion. There's a lot of phrases like encourage this, encourage that. Essentially, they're worthless phrases. They need to be looked at closely or just stricken. The examples are LU2 and Guiding Principle C. But again, you probably have a copy of what I've got here. The LU1D, Streamlined Review and Standards, this is extremely important that there be written definitions of what streamlined is and what ministerial review is. Without that, you're open for a big lawsuit later. There's a lot of very dodgy phrases like improvement of parking. Improvement essentially is a worthless phrase. I know we're talking about policies now, but there are things that are not policy that are important. Introduction, page 1. The early settlement of the town, initially called Uniontown, grew around a central plaza. I request this be changed to early non-indigenous settlement or early European American settlement. It's just a couple of words. The words streamline and ministerial review are in LU1B and LU1D. LU1E, the promise of single-family development, I'd say be very careful in any language in this. There is a comment that was brought in where the word maintain should be achieve. There's going to be virtually no single-family residential development. So any language here, I think someone who's wealthy and has lots of money could sue. Dave Mazur mentioned the Crafts Mall St. Louis Opportunity Zone. I have a page on that. I think that should just be removed. It's a Crafts Mall area is distinctly different from the south part of that. It should not be rezoned. Things like ensure that they are equitably distributed for community facilities. Very difficult to ensure something. It's essentially it becomes an impossible goal. The objectives, the policies on LU1, I had a rewrite of that paragraph to, again, create more clarity. There's a funny thing on LU4 where it says blocks should be limited to 1,600 or 2,000 feet. I don't know if that's a typo or I'm not understanding something, but that's 8 times the size of any city block in Arcata. There's the it says include inclusionary zoning measure in the next update of the housing element. Why is it not in this update of the housing element? Let's see. Again, LU2 specifies affordable homes. It uses the word ensure. We cannot ensure that there will be affordable homes. The city shall encourage a variety of choices for housing consumers. We talked about getting rid of the word consumer. In terms of units, location, sizes, types, design, the city can't possibly do that. So again, to summarize, and there's more, but perhaps you've read it yourself, just be on the lookout for things that the city can't really provide, because it can come back to bite us. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your comments.
Since last March, I've been sending you information as far as SB 1000, Environmental Justice and Urban Planning. It's a state law. You haven't incorporated this at all into your program. So I'm a little, I can't understand why you haven't done that, but you know, it has an effect, one aspect of it that we're talking about thousands of more cars that are going to be on the streets, and how that affects people that live on these streets, through the air quality, through the noise. I mean, this is the basics. Look it up in the state of California. It's right there, and you haven't done this. I gave examples of this in the past from living in Miami too, where the Wynwood area, I gave you articles on this, where, you know, I fully support mass transit. I try to use that everywhere I go, but the reality is that it doesn't usually work out that way, that people still need to have their cars. They have jobs that are all over. I use public transport when I'm in Miami, in LA, and generally it usually works out that it's the working poor that are using the mass transportation. It's like, it's very frustrating, the amount of time that you have to invest in waiting. So it's like, it's very tiring for a lot of people. So it's a kind of an easy out from the standpoint of just saying that everyone's going to use mass transportation here in Humboldt. And I would really love to believe that, but I don't think that's the reality. So you need to do something more about this, because you're not addressing what the effect of this is going to have on the city. And it's going to be a very negative effect if people are still in their cars driving all around. Streets are going to be backed up. People are going to like cut through neighborhoods to try to get around all of it. It's going to be hell. So it seems like you're living in another world and not really wanting to address this. And it's unfortunate, you know, and I just can't understand why. I know this is pretty a serious question, but I can't even get any answers when I go to Plan West, as far as, are you doing studies? How about the noise studies? How about, you know, when are they going to happen? Are you going to do them? Are you going to just do them in the gateway and then forget addressing the rest of the city? Because, you know, if you look on a map, you can see on H Street coming from the north, all the cars are coming down H Street. They're going to turn right at the plaza. You're already set in motion with the co-op turning those into one ways and turn them all the way around and go up G Street. So there's a lot of questions there. And I'd even address the bike path that you put on G Street. It's like a great that you did that, but all the crosswalks on the north side of all those are gone now. You're supposed to make a left-hand turn and just cut across the traffic. It's kind of like in another little world. It's not working out.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, I just have a brief point to address. There's a crossover policy that actually crosses over from the transportation element, and I just wanted to quote at this moment because it seems to be something that will be incorporated. It's policy T2, travel demand management. The city shall promote land use and development patterns that encourage walking, bicycle, and in-transit use, and a recognition of a link between land use and transportation. And so at this point, I just recommend the committee consider the preservation of open space along the linear corridor there on L Street, because that's going to be really key. I mean, we are going to be eventually talking about this, and there is definitely some land use in there that will be permanently changed. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Speakers online?
We have one. Let's see. We have a couple. Go ahead, Jane.
Hello. I just want to mention that I had a comment on the last one, but nobody noticed me. So I didn't get to say that I have not been able to discover exactly where Peter Wayman's letters or comments are. So if they're somewhere visible that we can find, I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, I want to talk about the problem with, I really agree with a lot of the comments that were included in the additional comments published this morning. And I want everybody to please take the time to thoroughly examine the draft provisions and make suggestions for approval. I also want to note the problems with the current plan on page 25, which talks about streamlined review and standards in the infill opportunity zones. The last sentence in that needs to be fixed. It says, it makes no sense to use the word consistent when it's meant to be consistency, I presume. So that needs to be fixed. Secondly, there's still been, and along the lines of what Fred says, there's no clarification as what is meant by, quote, a ministerial review process, and quote, and a, quote, a ministerial pathway for residential projects. Before anyone signs under this particular provision, that needs to be clarified. Which of the three streamlining models are we talking about here, which were outlined before? Option 1, which is review simply by the Community Development Director. Option 3, review that by the Planning Commission. Or Option 3, which I don't recall the details about. What are we, or are we really talking about by approval, by right approval? Please make clear what is being discussed before approving this particular provision. I think you really need to dig into it and understand it. And then basically, I think it's very short-sighted and negligent to propose high-density housing in areas that are going to be inundated by sea level within 30 to 50 years, regardless of their location within Arcata. We don't need to build in future flood zones, move such plans to higher elevations, and don't invest in short-term solutions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane. Go ahead, Sharon.
Oh no, I'm echoing. I have no idea why.
It's probably
Am I
on
still
our side. I
echoing?
apologize.
I apologize. At the March 14 Planning Commission meeting, David Loya said that the Transportation Safety Committee's recommendations regarding L Street would be clarified at their March 21 meeting. That meeting was canceled at some late point with no notice sent to the public. I only noticed because I pulled up the agenda a half hour before the meeting time and saw that it had been canceled. I am urging the Planning Commission not to discuss circulation or transportation issues until after staff updates their records to reflect the Transportation Safety Committee's policy recommendations, whenever that might happen. And will the canceled March 21 Transportation Safety Committee meeting be rescheduled? Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.
Is that it?
Lisa?
Hello.
Yeah, hi, we can hear you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Is this the proper time to speak about land use?
Yes.
I wasn't sure.
Yes, please do, Lisa.
But I guess I'm going to, because I can't hear you. Okay, so this is Lisa Brown, and I submitted an email to all of you this morning, and I hope that you received it and were able to review my comments. I highlighted 3 main concerns I have regarding policy and zoning changes that are being considered by the Commission this evening, and I will summarize briefly my concerns tonight. The first concern is the sphere of influence boundary. Simply put, as per state law, a sphere of influence identifies areas for future expansion of a city. And while General Plan 2020 attempted an alternate strategy to utilize the sphere to help protect agricultural lands, this strategy is too risky in today's climate, and we need to abandon it and shrink our sphere to exclude all agricultural parcels to the west and north of the city limits. My second concern is the rezoning of 2 parcels north of 17th Street that are being considered for a conversion from their protective natural resource designation of AR to high-density residential. We have an abundance of underutilized land that has already been impacted with past development, and the city should remain focused on guiding infill to these areas and continue to support our long-standing vision of retaining and protecting our agricultural resources. My third concern is the removal of language in policy LUAF found in packet page 25 regarding protection of ag resources. Staff has crossed out protective language in the last sentence, which reads, "Their productive open space and natural resource values are important to the community and shall be preserved," and the following is crossed out, "and conversion to other non-compatible uses shall be prohibited." This language has stood the test of time on General Plan 2020, and there's no good reason to eliminate it now. I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Lisa. That is all.
Okay.
Okay, we're good to go.
All right. After that comment, can we have a staff report then?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did just wanted to start by acknowledging that Commissioner Figueroa and Commissioner Lehman weren't in the discussion around the framework, and so I know you've had an opportunity to review it. I just wanted to take a moment and, garner your thoughts, your ideas, potentially your support for moving forward and make sure that we're doing this with full agreement. We've got the materials that we posted last time, the ground rules, which were included in the framework in your packet that was amended last time by the Planning Commission, as well as the agenda and the gradients of agreement, as well as the timeline that we have to cover each of these different elements moving through the end of your meetings in June. So before I get started, I just wanted to give an opportunity to get your thoughts and potentially agreement on this process.
Say the approach is ambitious, and we have to set some guidelines and some principles, and I feel that this is the approach that we're gonna move forward with, and my counterparts here are in agreement with it. I'm in agreement with them, so I feel this is a good means in which we can try to move forward in regard to this effort and trying to expedite this process.
I'm also in agreement with the framework. I think we have a huge amount of work to do between now and June and July, and we need to get it done. I'll make 2 comments. One is the rules are good. I think we have to be certain that everyone sticks to them. And the second comment is, Scott, you're going to have to be a firm chairman and make sure everyone does. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. I did just want to take a few moments to orient us to the materials tonight. This is new for everyone. I think it's going to take some practice to get used to this process, and I think that we'll see some process improvements along the way. One of the components that we established last time is that staff would provide the materials at least a week in advance, so you'd have them at your disposal so that you could take those materials in and start to formulate your thoughts and provide them back out with your suggested changes. One of the commissioners made a recommendation that we send those out in Word documents so that you can cut and paste them more easily and have them, without having to retype them or whatever. And so we'll be sending those out in Word documents, one process improvement. The other is it took a considerable amount of time to format some of these, and so as we go through, I'd like to make some recommendations next time around about how the format could be improved. We'll see if that helps at all. It could be that, you know, with the way that we work these through, it just doesn't have make a difference anyway. So I'll send those suggestions out separately. We'll be updating the public at the same time as we update the commission. We'll be putting those on our website and then bringing those forward. So you should be able to have those on the agenda, and the community should be able to see those at the same time as well. Okay, so with those preliminary comments out of the way, I do want to show you some of the materials tonight. We've compiled the comments that we received according to the framework as best I could. So I think one of the first steps is to verify that you're comfortable moving forward with the way that they've been organized. We've structured these based on the comments last time so that we have a set of policies that we think at the staff level, you know, those modifications to the majority, if not all, commissioners. Approval approach. First thing I'd like you to do is to look through the consent approval items, which you received as a compiled document, which were placed in front of you in printed format, and which are available in printed format here for the public to review and walk along with us. And confirm that you're ready to take action on the entire consent items. If there's something that someone wants to remove, that item would be removed. Yes, Chair?
Go ahead, Judith.
Yeah, you've done an amazing job at compiling all those comments from everyone into one document. However, if we have actually attempted to write some notes that aren't easily classified into material that's already on the draft document, as I did, will those be circulated to the Planning Commission and part of the record, or is that material simply going to remain with you?
Oh, in the document that you sent to me? Yes, we can absolutely. I did not send the original documents out that you all sent to me, but we can incorporate that as part of it and attach those to, pin those to the record as well. And I apologize for that. My intent was absolutely not to miss anything that you submitted. I just was trying to simplify and condense.
Go ahead, Peter.
You did do an excellent job of compiling these, but my question would be, if we all decided on a given format, why not just have each of us provide a document and we get everybody's document to read, so that no comment gets left out? I don't think it would be that cumbersome. I recognize that there's value in assembling it, but there's judgment in doing that, and perhaps things get lost.
Yeah, the purpose for assembling them into a single document is to try and follow the rubric in the framework for identifying the priority topics to discuss, recognizing that we don't have time to discuss in this meeting format, even with the more structured framework for discussion, all of the topics. So this elevates to the top those items that have, followed along with the framework that we've done. And so items that have an impact on the environment and have a recommendation, an explicit recommendation for approval, get prioritized over others. Items that have an explicit recommendation for approval that don't have an environmental impact get prioritized over others, so on and so forth down the list. And so there is an element of judgment that staff is using to try and bring forward the recommendations that you've made into a concise document that we can follow through this process. But it allows us to do things like have a consent approval that you all can look at ahead of making a decision about that consent approval and say, yeah, I'm willing to take those on as consent, or no, I want this one removed. And then instead of having discussion on all 5 of these items, you might adopt them in one motion. If you're amenable to it, you're amenable to it, so on and so forth down the line, then there's no further discussion. If everyone gets, and I can certainly send out the original documents so that you can read that additional information, But if we start this meeting with 6 different documents and we say, okay, where do you want to start? That's going to take considerable amount of time, which is why the framework was structured the way it is. So unless the commissioners want to restructure the framework and go back and revisit that, I would offer that we've brought this forward because that's what the framework recommended and that's what we agreed to last time and conceded to this time.
Well, I'll just say I'm all right with the framework, and I suggest including each of our suggestions also in the packet, so you can have both the, compiled and each of ours. And then I actually do want to pull one of the consent items, the last one.
Okay, real quick, just so we don't lose it. Which one do you want to pull?
The one about the reorganized vision statement versus the revised vision statement.
Excuse me, can you say that again?
Yes, I support the revised vision statement, Appendix D, the one that starts with that.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry.
I think having the summary is very useful. It would be especially useful if we got it before the middle of a workday when we have a meeting scheduled at 5:30, which is what happened today. And I would not like to do that again. So if there's any way of getting it with a reasonable amount of time so that we can reasonably review it in the midst of normal life, we're all volunteers, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, again, I would just point back to the framework and offer that the way that it's currently structured, you would have until the day before the meeting to submit comments, the morning of the day before the meeting to submit comments, and then staff would have until the end of business that day to provide the compiled documents back. So on a typical Tuesday meeting date, you would submit them by Monday morning, and then staff would submit them back by Monday afternoon. If you all want to revisit the framework and change that and push it back and give yourself less time to submit comments to staff, we would be able to turn those around the same day and provide you more time to review those comments.
Let's do it that way. Let's provide our comments earlier so that we get your compiled version earlier.
How can we provide our comments earlier if the material doesn't come to us until...
You're going to have the items, the substantive items, so if you're reviewing the land use element, you'll have that at least a week in advance before the meeting. So your meeting on Tuesday, you have it the Tuesday before.
Okay,
and then,
so this was an exception that will not reoccur. What happened?
You've had the land use element for a couple of months now.
No, I understand that, but we didn't have your compilation and we didn't have anyone else's comments.
I sent those out yesterday, Sunday afternoon at about 1 o'clock. Did you not receive those?
I saw this compilation when I looked at it probably yesterday or this morning. And regardless of when you sent it out, if one has a job and needs to go to work and sleep and stuff like that, and wants to make some reasonable comments, this level of material the night before a meeting is troublesome.
I recognize, I understand. I'm happy to move it back to, and we'll turn it around the same day, whatever day you all want to pick.
Can I recommend we move it back to 2 days before the meeting? We have our, our suggestions in, and then you can get it back by the end of that day, and then we'll have a full 24 hours with, the compiled suggestions to review.
Does anyone object to?
Well,
can we?
So 2 days before would, you're saying Friday, we'll have meetings always on Tuesdays, typically on Tuesdays.
Correct.
So Sunday morning,
yeah, I'd
we
rather
have our comments in. Sunday night,
can we leave the weekend out of it though, and maybe?
Yeah, are we gonna be authorizing David's overtime and staff's overtime?
I'm happy to do whatever you all need me to do to get this material turned around. So
let's get it in on Friday so that David can get to us on Friday evening.
I'm happy to do that.
So cutoff is Friday morning. with the goal of hopefully receiving back by Friday evening.
And I will commit to end of business. It will be my objective to turn them around much, much sooner than that, by midday at the latest.
Okay, and we will always have material that we need to review at least a
Week in advance.
Okay.
Minimum.
Is anyone opposed to that approach?
No, we
Can I
already
just-
have the transportation elements already in our possession. I mean, we have material way ahead.
Right. Okay.
So just procedurally, sometimes you'll have special meetings that might interfere with that. I will have it, we'll say 72 hours or the first business day in advance of your meeting. So where the business day or where the 72 hours falls on a weekend, it'll be the Friday before.
Good.
Is anyone opposed? Okay, we'll change the framework.
Thank you.
May I ask a quick procedural question?
Go
Chair?
ahead, Dan.
Right now, what I see before us, this section on vision, are we voting as a group on this, on all the highlighted stuff on this section at once? Or are we going to pick it apart?
Yeah, so at this point, we put these on the agenda under consent. So everything on here, with the exception of the yellow policy, is considered on consent. You can take them in one. If there's any commissioner who wishes to pull an item off consent, Commissioner Simmons pulled this statement off of consent, then you can do so now. Those will be moved to the end of the items for discussion.
Okay, so if we have a problem even with one word in here, we should just pull that item?
Yes.
All right, please pull "We share the benefits of California Polytechnic."
Any others?
Okay, so not seeing any others, can we then move to approve the remaining items in the consent approval?
Is there anyone opposed?
Is there anyone opposed to approving the remaining items in green? No opposition.
Okay, we will come back to these two yellow statements. So stepping down into the framework after we get through the consent, the next item is to go through the pitches. So these are the elevator pitches. Again, we're talking the vision statement right here. If the person who would like to make the pitch.
May I just ask, sorry, point of order, just because we're just getting this figured out, why wouldn't we finish what is above real quick? I mean, when are we going to come back to the yellows?
These will come
How much
back
later?
in line after these ones.
Okay.
And again, the recommendation would be, and we're a little off track for time, the recommendation would be to try and stay on the timeline so that we provide equitable timelines for each agenda topic. Right now, the idea is by 6:45, we will have finished the vision statement, which is in 5 minutes, and then we'll take a quick break and move on to land use. It's up to the commission, though, to decide how you want to spend your time. And then the idea is at the end of the night, whatever we haven't completed goes into the bike rack, and then you come back to them later. So I would offer that you get done with vision, move on to land use, and start working through those.
Point of order, is there any way to address the consent stuff, the stuff removed from that before we go on to the rest of the stuff? That would be consistent with our approach to consent calendars and the rest of our processes.
Again, as a process point, what I would suggest is that you don't in general do it that way, because the items on consent may or may not have impacts with the environment that you want to consider. In this particular instance, I don't think it makes a difference one way or the other. And so you could certainly do that if you want to as a body. Instead of moving these to the end of the next section, move them into the beginning of the next section.
If it doesn't make that much difference with these items, then let's just dispense of them and move more cleanly on.
Okay.
So then, next would be Matt speaking to the item that you pulled.
Yeah, super duper quick. The old vision that was supported by this one uses the character of the neighborhood language that we changed elsewhere, and I would recommend making the same change that we did already in the land use element.
Is anybody opposed to making the change that Matt recommended to that item? No opposition.
Okay. If I could type.
And then Dan.
So do I have this correct, that you're going to change in the old one, ditch Appendix D2, but change the neighborhood character language in the original?
Correct.
Okay.
To be consistent with previous changes.
Okay.
Great. Dan, you pulled the other item?
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to that?
And I don't know who wrote this, but generally I like it, except for one word. We work together to ensure that the university supports Arcata's vision for our future, just as the city is an accommodating host to the university. And I would just like a kinder word than accommodating. It sounds a little bit like we tolerate them to me. Enthusiastic host to the university. I think the university is a big, welcome institution in this community, and I'd like to say so in our vision statement.
I was the one who suggested that language, and it was a means of creating a sense of mutuality. We wish to share the benefits and host the university, but we do expect them to support Arcata's vision. In line with some recent friction, I'm not sure that the word accommodating is unduly negative. Rather than finding something way more enthusiastic, I would just eliminate accommodating and leave it just as the city is a host to the university. I think the sense here is that we do accommodate them. We are their hosts, but we expect them to support our vision as well.
And I fully support the sense of them supporting our vision. I like that phrasing very well. I'm just pushing for something more positive. So we can do 1 to 5 or however we want to roll on that.
Does anyone have any brainstorms of a better word?
Welcoming.
Yeah, I like welcoming. That's a little warmer than accommodating.
Why don't we just drop the language and say just host? You know what I mean?
Okay, before you go on to another pitch, do you want to take the gradients of agreement or a negative poll on this? Is anyone opposed to changing it to welcoming? Okay, we've got 3 gradients of agreement.
So wait, so for 1 is, sorry, I completely.
1 is, and again, you have a key in front of you. 1 is that you agree completely and you support it. 5 is, I can't support this, I'm going to vote it down. 4 is, I have strong objections, but I'm not going to stand in the way. 3 is, I'm neutral or have no opinion. And 2 is, I support it with minor concerns.
So show of hands about changing accommodating to welcoming.
Okay.
So change made.
Okay, I do want to do a time check. We're just after the 6:45. Do you want to keep going or do you want to take your break?
Oh, we got to keep going.
Let's keep going.
Okay.
Because we're not going to go as late this evening.
Plus, we're building a head of steam here.
Yeah. Precisely. So, so as we move now into the commissioner pitch for amendment, we will hear from the commissioner who made the proposal regarding the "we're drawn to the plaza."
That was me too. There was some language added to the 2000 plan, which I'm looking for here. It's toward the end. In the 2000 plan, it read, "Our historic and distinctive downtown square remains the heart of Arcata. It's our common ground for community events, daily commerce, retail, restaurants, and entertainment, providing a blueprint for community spaces replicated throughout the city." And my suggestion was to eliminate the new language at the end there. The original purpose for this part of the vision statement was to highlight the uniqueness of the plaza as our city's center. And I think that if we retain that purpose, highlighting the uniqueness of the plaza, but also having language elsewhere in the plan about other neighborhood centers, we've done that. But adding that replicating throughout the city is actually kind of contradicting the original purpose of this vision item.
Isn't that the version that we just discarded?
I don't think so.
I thought it was. I thought we agreed to go with the original version, not the appendix, what is it? Appendix D, not appendix D2. Wait, didn't we just decide that?
That's the same language, correct?
Yeah, but it's not in, that language is not in the one that we approved.
I'm referring to page 56 on the
No, I
vision that we have.
I thought the vision statement we just approved is on page 48 and 49, not the one that follows.
Yeah,
So it's a moot point at this point, if that's true.
The item that was on page 54 that says, it starts at the top, vision. And then on the edge, it says attachment D, revised vision statement. Is the revised one. And that one, I think the community vision starts on page 56, where
I think the question is, did we already fix the vision statement that would make this language we're discussing now a moot point?
Yeah, we have to take a second here because the vision statement, Joe, I'm sorry. We're going to try and get the.
Okay, I was referring to the language that was on page 57 of the packet that you actually gave to us in print, which was not this week, but last week. And if anyone is looking at a digital version, it may come out as a different page. I don't have a computer. I'm looking at the material I've gotten.
Page 51 of the packet.
We're gonna pull this up so that we can look at it together. And I apologize for the confusion. I did not catch this in the packet, but the community vision that you're referring to, Commissioner Mayor, is the original community vision that was revised. The page that starts vision at the very top of it, not Arcata Community Vision, is the reworked one. So the lettering got reversed on these. The old one has the little picture on it, Arcata Community Forest, and has the formatting of the original General Plan 2020. And so I think your comment is still relevant, but I want to go back and make sure that everyone is adopting the vision that we think we're adopting. Yeah, that is the revised vision statement.
It's the page right before the page you were referring to.
Exactly.
Whoa, I'm confused.
We're gonna pull it up.
My
We're gonna pull it up.
understanding
tight.
was that that vision statement was something that was submitted by members of the public, and that was not the revised vision statement that relates to the vision statement in the previous general plan that's now, my understanding of what this was is something very different than that this was one of two different proposals, and that staff's proposal is the one that begins on page 56.
The vision statement was, okay, so let me just explain where these two documents came from real quick, and then we'll get into taking a second look at the changes that were made. The vision statement was the first work that we did with the community. We had several hundred surveys taken. We had a couple of public meetings on Zoom. We took a lot of input to revise the existing vision statement, which you see here. So this is the city's current vision statement in the general plan 2020, starting on packet page 56. And it has red underlined strikeout to show the changes that were made based on that community involvement. Subsequent to that work, we worked with Change Labs, who's doing our health element and has done a lot of suggestions for equity, the equity components to our general plan, and they proposed this revised vision statement, which is completely rewritten. This was never, completed with the assistance of the public. This was their take on what the public had modified in our workshops, reimagined. It gets at the intent from the original vision, but it is not the elements that the community had looked at. So our first question is, do you want to use this revised vision statement, use this language instead of the old vision statement?
Okay, I misunderstood, and because we had not too much information about who Change Lab is, or what we were being asked to comment on, my comments would probably be different.
I'll say, so given that are your concerns resolved then, Judith?
Well, I need to know which vision statement that you're all making these recommendations based on.
I would like to work on the second one, the original one, the one that you say is in 2020.
This one here.
Packet page 56. With all
Yes,
the strikeouts and highlights.
that's the one that I would like to work on too. I appreciate the vision statement on page 54, but I was making my comments on these strikeout from the original.
That's what I thought.
20 general plan that used to be Arcata General Plan 2020, rather than the one that begins on 54 from Change Lab.
Go ahead, Peter.
Listen, I did not, in retrospect, understand which was which, but I strongly support the first one, this one. I think it's well-written, it's concise, and it's just, I think a vision statement has to be short and impactful, and I think that's exactly what this is. I think the one that follows has a lot, if you ask me, a lot of empty language, which I think makes it much less effective. So I strongly support this first one. And that's what my comment is about. So evidently they were mixed up, but my comment is about this one.
Okay, yeah, they got reordered in our system, so I apologize for that. So I think the first thing to clarify is if we have a majority of members who want to work on this vision statement, or a majority of members that want to work on this vision statement.
Or just take one or the other as is.
That's what we're trying to decide. Does anyone objected to using this one that's up now, the Change Lab vision statement that's that's up before us now? Does anyone objected to adopting or discussing that version of the vision statement? No objections. So given that vision statement, then I suppose the question is, are there any concerns or edits to that vision statement, or are we comfortable adopting it as is? Does anyone have any specific changes they want to make to that? Peter?
Yeah, the second comment came from me, and it is in both the equity and connection and community sections, we have a list of characteristics, race, social position, economic position, culture, background, or any other socially defined circumstance. And I'm asking a question, do we want to include a characteristic of religion in that list, which is conspicuously absent? I'm easy either way, but I just wanted to bring it up.
Well, now I feel like we have two separate comments that we're trying to resolve simultaneously, which is not the plan.
I do too. And maybe you can just take a negative poll real quick on the first one, which is to, does anyone object to deleting this first comment, "We're drawn to the plaza," which is referring to Appendix D2, I believe.
Yeah, I suppose it's irrelevant if what we're going with is this attachment D vision statement.
Is anyone opposed to removing that? And then we can just clear that question and move on to the question of language around religion in the other vision statement. Let's do it.
Okay. Here's a process thing. I made a couple of suggestions for the vision statement, which, if we're switching to this first vision statement, then are out of place. But the content of those comments, I think, is still important. The wording I presented is certainly not in that format. One relates to the relationship of the university to the city. The other relates to the relationship of the city to our neighbors outside of the city. And I think it is important to include something about both of those in a vision statement, regardless of which one it is.
Anybody opposed to that?
I think they're excellent statements.
No opposed.
Okay, so these two concepts here, do I have that correct? We share the benefits of Cal Poly, and add a statement, we work with neighbors.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm going to turn these ones red. Because they refer to the other one. And we'll incorporate these into the vision statement and bring that back.
Okay, great. So then moving on, and Peter, you already gave your kind of 45-second pitch on the religion being called out as a characteristic. Is there anyone who's opposed to that language change?
Could you explain where that would be again?
Yeah, there are two sections. Let's see, under equity, I won't, to attain their full potential, and no one is disadvantaged in achieving this potential because of race, social position, economic position, culture, background, or any other socially defined circumstance. So we would add the word religion to that list.
Is anyone opposed to that addition to the language?
And it occurs in the next section as well. There's a list of characteristics.
So we can propagate that language forward
Yeah.
into other.
Every race, ethnicity, gender identity, and socioeconomic strata. And again, we could choose to do it in both places or in one place. I'm easy. I just felt like that was an omission.
Is anyone opposed to adding that language? Seeing no opposed, then let's move on to the next piece.
Because I was commenting on the other version of the language, I'm wondering if I could also suggest that for that third paragraph in the first vision statement, it does mention artistic expression at the end. Does it make sense to change that section to health, safety, and the arts or something like that? It's a kind of a weird combination of stuff.
We can make it health, safety, and well-being, and then arts are sort of included within what makes a good human life.
Sounds good.
Okay, what's the specific change then? To strike this language here and put health, safety, and well-being?
No, we keep the language, but then the title of that section is health, safety, and well-being.
Okay.
Is anyone opposed to making that change? No opposed.
What's that?
So this gets us then into land use.
Okay, and you want to keep rolling, or do you want to take a quick break? Keep rolling. Okay.
I think we got a head of steam. We should keep rolling if everyone's okay.
Okay, we have several items on for consent approval. One is to add Sunset Neighborhood Implementation Measure I to make that a higher density neighborhood. That was the one that the speaker had a concern with. One is to change the definition of residential high density to include local serving commercial uses such as corner grocery stores, coffee shops, etc. will be permitted in RE zones. One is to change additional, or to add an additional policy, the end of 1, which is the residential, is to reduce maximums and reduce parking maximums to reduce them citywide within our infill zones. There was a comment about changing the pie chart to reflect the breakdown on the residential districts, and there was a further comment from the public to break them down by residential zones alone. Changing LU1E so that the development diversity housing types goes from maintain to achieve. Striking business in the CG area will be expected to provide sufficient on-site parking under the CG definition. LU4H to strike language about how we recognize that petroleum is important. And then to change the guiding principle C in various ways that makes it a little bit more readable and intelligible. LU6B to change the use of herbicides to other types of agricultural practices, spreading fertilizer and et cetera, so that we're not explicitly recognizing that herbicides are an inherent component of agriculture. And then some changes to the principles and goals. Some changes to the community centers, residential land uses, industrial land uses, and agricultural land uses. So these would all be considered as consent unless there's something that someone wants to remove from consent.
Go ahead, Judith.
Yeah, I'd like to remove items and here figuring out how they're designated.
If you just reference the bullet numbers, so these are all listed 1 through 14.
Okay. I think what I'm looking at is 1B1. It's on page 2 at the very top about neighborhood upzoning. And the second one is item number 3, LU-1X, reduce parking maximums.
Any others?
Do any other commissioners have items they want to pull off of this land use consent? Okay. It's like 1 through 14, ending in commissioner pitch for amendment.
Next time I will number these pages for you. This was done Sunday morning. I apologize.
Yeah, so number 7, LU-4H.
Petroleum processing
Yeah.
and extraction.
I'd like to pull that and just discuss it a little bit.
Anyone else have an item to pull? Peter?
I'm not suggesting pulling it, but in terms of parking, it's item 3. I made some.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, item 3 is pulled already, so you have a chance to talk about that one.
All right.
Yeah, let's wait till we discuss that, Peter. Thank you. So, seeing no other items to pull, the next question is there anyone opposed to passing the items remaining in the land use consent calendar? Okay, so the rest of that calendar passes or is adopted.
Okay, and did commissioners want to go in the same order, taking the items that were removed from consent first?
That sounds good. Why don't you start, Judith? Start with the first item that you pulled and give us your elevator pitch.
Okay, I was referring in a couple of places where we have a list of residential low-density neighborhoods for which we would consider upzoning. One of those is actually a neighborhood conservation area, and that's embedded in our zoning as well as in our plan. And so I think that pulling, talking about upzoning that neighborhood sort of occupies a somewhat separate area than the other neighborhoods. I would be willing to think of that as, consider means of upzoning Bayview as an implementation measure, but I'm not willing to lump it with the other neighborhoods and say that staff should start developing an upzoning plan for all of these together. There's been quite a bit of concern about the university's expansion into the Bayview neighborhood, as well as quite extreme proposals for high-density development there in the past. And so I don't want to be cavalier about saying, okay, now the city's going to dump that and look at upzoning everything near the university.
So what I heard was changing this from bring proposed rezone to bringing a proposed rezone to consider. And then that would give the commission an opportunity to consider those different areas listed at a later date.
yes, at a later date and not as part of this general plan policy right now. And I realize that sounds like we're shuffling it off when it's something that some people consider urgent.
What we had decided when this topic came up the last time, I think, was to include it as an implementation measure instead of making that change now. That gives the Planning Commission the opportunity to consider this, the time frame being in the first 2 years. The language is softened here a little bit to consider allowing, instead of making it appear that in the next 2 years you're going to bring this forward and we're going to definitely do it. And so I'm wondering if that addresses your concern and maybe would be accepted as a friendly amendment.
I'm happy to accept that. That was my intent, was that we would bring it back for consideration.
Okay, I think consider does it, one word.
Any opposed to that change, resolving that issue? Okay, done. You had a second item that you pulled, Judith?
Yeah, it was number 3 about the parking. A proposal to say reduce parking maximums in most of the walkable areas. So right now we don't have parking maximums. And so I'm not sure what you're meaning when you say reduce parking maximums.
I think we do have parking maximums. I checked the zoning. I don't think they do anything anywhere because they're so high that I don't think any developer has ever thought we needed that much parking. And so my thinking is we should reduce them so that they are having more of an effect on development.
Oh, okay, those maximums, the ones that have disappeared from anyone's awareness. So are you saying to still have maximums, but at lesser levels?
And is there a specific language we could get to that would resolve this issue in this proposal? Is there a specific number? How are you envisioning that, Matt?
Well, okay, so my understanding was that these sort of goals could be more of a general direction to push ourselves in, right? And so particularly in the strategic infill redevelopment areas, I was hoping to sort of make it the policy to look at reducing, and I know it's reduce maximum is like a hard, I'm trying to lower the amount of allowed parking.
Allowed versus mandated?
Well, there's parking minimums where you mandate parking, and then there's a parking maximum where you say you can't just build a giant parking lot here, please. And so I'm trying to squeeze those. That was my intent.
Would it make sense to so there are quite a few walkable areas in the city that would be having new zoning, including in the gateway. And I'm wondering if it would make sense to simply have a policy that reads something like set parking maximums to promote walkability, and leave it at that until we get to the zoning.
I have a couple of suggestions. I agree totally that we need to minimize parking in Arcata. Let me point out, there are a lot of parking lots in Arcata that are often mostly empty. There's a lot of asphalt that is being used that could be used for much more reasonable purposes. Guiding principle H says, encourage high-density residential infill development and low parking ratios. I suggest we change the word low to minimal, so that we are saying the minimum necessary you know, that at least encourages downsizing. Then under LU3A, Commercial General, it says businesses in this area will be expected to provide sufficient on-site parking. And how do we determine what's sufficient on-site parking? Why don't we de-emphasize parking by changing the word sufficient to minimal? Again, provide minimal on-site parking instead of sufficient.
Now, does that expand us out of the question in?
I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, we're talking about parking and you know.
Well, if language around changing language to minimum parking will compress the gap between the mandated and the cap and can be propagated somewhere else, wherever those issues come up. If we could find language that we all agree on, then that would seem to resolve the matter at hand and also address it where it comes up in other areas in this land use document.
Are there projects that are trying to include more parking than we see necessary today? I mean, it seems like, Joe, or do you have any input on that? I mean, is this a topic?
It's been a couple times it's come before the city, and oftentimes if it's through administrative design review, we just ask them not to show it. Don't show the parking, those spaces there, because they would require a minor use permit to exceed that maximum level. There was a project that came before the Planning Commission that staff brought forward, and it was determined that there wasn't really an issue with the parking in a residential low-density zoning district. It wasn't a commercial project or anything like that, but most often it is that type of use where it's often a business that is trying to operate. But it's pretty minimal where it occurs, but we do look at that closely.
Is there anyone on the commission that objects to language that would reduce the maximum and shrink that gap down? Okay, so I think we're just looking for a specific language proposal.
Well, I think I added what I heard Commissioner Mayer say, and I just wanted to make sure that I've conveyed this.
I think it would be clearer if it said something like maximum allowable parking or allowable parking, just something to make it clear that you're looking at or allowed or something like that. Maybe allowed is better than
I think that we might get at it with the term requirements. We might be starting to add more words than we need. I think this is certainly, we can still interpret this. I don't think there's a problem with that if that's an important term, but I think reduce the maximum parking requirements or reduce maximum allowed parking. So take out requirements or allowable, one of the two.
Okay, that's less confusing. The idea that you would the way this is phrased, it could, without that extra word, also be interpreted that you're actually loosening up that parking maximum. You're reducing it, but clearly that's not what Matt meant.
The original way I put it in the bolded, reduce parking maximums, I feel like is
gets us there.
Yeah, and is people understand it when they read it. Is that not the case?
Maybe maximum allowable parking or something like that, because
okay, so
let's look at
this still conveys, I think, the message. I think I read it clearly, and if this is the general policy direction that the commission wants to go in terms of a recommendation, I think we might be able to finesse language, but this probably gets us through the topic at this point.
I think so. I think we're verging on getting lost in semantics here. Is there anyone opposed to this language change? None opposed. Then what was the next?
That's me.
Who pulled the next item down?
I did.
Yep.
And I,
Can I ask, are we going to change those other areas where guiding principle H and LU 3A to minimal instead of low or sufficient? Do we want to do that?
So I would suggest that we have the items that were submitted beforehand, and to maintain the framework, I would continue to work through the framework that you have established. I've certainly heard the suggestion to identify those areas. I think those are small changes we can make, but I wouldn't take time in the meeting right now to go over those.
Yeah, let's keep rolling. Go ahead, Dan. Let's hear the.
okay, and I
pro.
totally agree with the sentiments expressed here in LU4H. I would like Peter's input on this. This stricken red sentence at the beginning, the city of Arcata recognizes the national need for the responsible, and this is where I would adapt it, development and distribution of the country's energy resources. And I'm just feeling like, how could that be wrong? Arcata needs to pay attention. We have a big wind project proposed right off our shores here. And right now, most of our energy consumption is fossil fuels that we don't want anything to do with. So this is just recognizing that we are part of this connected tissue of energy on the nation scale. The rest of it, could read something like, the city also recognizes the potential adverse impacts such activities may have. Petroleum extraction is of particular concern on the North Coast. On our offshore, petroleum extraction will result in negative impacts on the climate, our coastal scenic resources, and threatens our sensitive land and marine environments. And then it can go straight back into the city, therefore, finds that in order to minimize adverse, et cetera. The rest of the paragraph as reads. I just kind of hate to drop that, we are part of the energy challenge. And we have some local exciting alternative energy that we need to discuss. Anyway.
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead, Matt.
So this was my suggestion. I totally hear what you're saying, Dan. The words exploration, recovery, and processing to me just scream oil and not offshore wind. And so what I would suggest is if we want to keep that language, we change it to just be about energy generally, instead of having that specific language that talks about oil development.
I dropped those too.
Okay.
In what I just read, those weren't included. Yes, I totally agree with that.
Could you read that again?
I'll try, yeah.
I was going to say, but how even in the renewable search, we're with exploration and recovery of those resources, there is an impact, and there's an inherent impact, whether we want to recognize it or not. In fact, those turbines are going to be ran on petroleum lubricants. So I feel there's definitely a need for a recognition of, of what we participate in as a nation and also as a community in one way or another, to steer change. So I feel more in line with Dan in the way that he perceives it, and whether it's oil and gas or wind, there's still we're gonna have to. There's wildcats. There's still gonna be an exploratory component of it. There may be incidences. That's just part of that process, and part of that's why it's an EIR and not just a mitigated negative deck for a project of such. So there'll be impact on wildlife. There'll be an impact on whatever. So I think we still need to recognize, even in our new discoveries and how we proceed with our future, will have an impact.
I think I get your gist. Can we hear Dan restate that, and then we can see?
All right, I'll just read it the way I had edited it. The city of Arcata recognizes the national need for the responsible development and distribution of the country's energy resources. The city also recognizes the potential adverse impacts such activities may have. Petroleum extraction is of particular concern on the North Coast. On or offshore petroleum extraction will result in negative impacts on the climate, our coastal scenic resources, and threatens our sensitive land and marine environments. Therefore, now we go back into the paragraph as it reads, therefore the city finds that in order to minimize, et cetera, et
And
cetera.
so on and so forth. Go ahead, Judith.
I really like that, and can I suggest that we change the title of LU-4H to energy production and
development,
right, something like that. Just change the title to be more inclusive.
Go ahead, Peter.
Dan, is your wording, I mean, is that written down? Because
Yeah, I have it written. I have it written here, and if David didn't get it, we can catch up later on the exactness of it.
I think a title of energy development and use would work.
Okay, I'm sorry, Commissioner Mayor, energy production and use was your title?
Peter, you said energy development. I'll go with yours.
Okay, don't fight, don't fight.
And that means we're going to have a really long title that includes it all.
I think that appropriately handles the upstream, midstream, and downstream component of energy production.
Okay, and then David, do you need the specific language that Dan suggested?
Absolutely, yes. I definitely did not track that. So what I've got here is change the title from petroleum extraction processing to energy production and use, to not strike this first sentence.
Well, it's a hybridized first sentence. I can give it to you.
To strike this and then add Dan's language.
Correct. Perhaps.
I'll work with him later on this if we don't.
Yeah, can we just, if everyone on the commission is comfortable with the language that Dan read a couple of times, can we just get that to you after the meeting, David, for editing?
So I just want to make sure I've got this clear. So this is it. Strike this, add Dan's language, and then the rest of the sentence is okay.
That's close enough.
That's correct. Yeah, that looks right.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan.
Any opposed? Okay. Okay. We have 9 items for commissioner pitches. It is 7:30. We're on to item number 1, proposed changing LU1C.
Say that again, David, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're on to item number 1 under the commissioner pitches, the elevator pitches. Item number 1 is changed to LU1C.
That looks like a Matt one to me.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm just going to let the pitch speak for itself, and you can all tear it up.
LU1K?
LU1C, it's up on the screen here. Prioritization of transit and active transportation. Reduce or eliminate minimum parking requirements citywide, period. Striking the language in areas where transit and active transportation is planned to support the transportation needs of the community, including neighborhoods where biking infrastructure, trails, complete streets, and transit is or is planned to be accessible. So
I have a question. Do you mean eliminate minimum? That sounds like we're asking for more parking.
So a parking minimum requires a builder to build parking when they build a building. We, the city, say you must build parking to build this building here. I'm saying that we reduce as an option still, I left it in there, or eliminate that requirement wherever possible in the city and not require the building of parking.
Judith, you had a comment on this?
Yeah, this was actually a question for staff. Under the ADA and state requirements, are there parking requirements for handicapped accessible buildings and uses already included that would remain if we were to adopt a very citywide statement like this?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I believe the answer is that handicap parking is based on a percentage of the parking stalls installed. And so if there's no parking required, I believe you're not required to, but I don't know that for a fact, so I want to bring that back to you. What I would offer is that if you do change this, it doesn't commit you to not requiring parking. And then we're also discussing the potential of having enhanced ADA and accessible requirements above the building code. And so there's a couple of other ways that you can get at it if that's your primary concern.
Okay, I think until we know what those other ways are, which would be in the circulation element, I'm not willing to go as far as this statement.
Here's a suggestion. We could eliminate the word minimum. Just say, reduce or eliminate parking requirements citywide. That's
way too vague. It's a broad policy statement that's already in our other policies. I mean, it's already pretty clear in the circulation element.
Maybe this is a good one for the bike rack, as it looks like.
You could do a bike rack, or you could do gradients of a agreement at this point. It's up to you.
I would like to know just a little bit about minimum parking requirements as is. Like the Sorrel building, I understand 40 plus units, right? And 15 parking space, something like that?
Yeah, so I can give you the super high level overview in 45 seconds or less. Somebody time me. Within most residential districts, you have to have at least one parking space per unit. There are some exceptions. Within most commercial or industrial, it's one parking space per 300 or 500 square feet of build-out area. Joe's going to correct me if I'm wrong. In the downtown, you're not required to provide any parking unless you have greater than 7 units. If you have greater than 7 units, it's 1/3 the number of units in spaces. And currently in the Gateway Area Plan, there's a proposal to reduce the parking requirements even lower.
29 seconds.
I really appreciate the point you made, Judith, about ADA spaces. And I know that there are jurisdictions that have eliminated parking minimums. And so I'm going to do some research and maybe send it around to everyone about what those jurisdictions did to ensure that ADA parking spaces were still required, because I think that's super important.
Let's put this in the bike rack then. It feels like we don't have enough information to really get through this right now.
Yeah, the way to resolve these would be to either push it to a vote with gradients of approval or gradients of agreement, or a negative vote, or move it to the bike rack. I'm hearing we're moving to the bike rack.
I just feel like there's information we don't have unless Commissioner feels differently about that. I think Matt's going to do some research. Okay. It sounds like the city can weigh in.
Okay, I'm going to make the bike rack gray.
Great.
Next, LU2B, diversity and choice of residential environments, and LU2C, planned development residential. I believe this was maybe Commissioner Mayer. Do I have that right? These two sections represent another opportunity to incorporate wording to indicate that the city encourages housing for all. Is this sounding familiar to anyone? Oh, this one actually didn't have a specific, I would suggest we go on. This doesn't have a specific recommendation.
Then let's move on. What's the next item? LU6C?
Protection of agricultural lands and uses within the city.
Okay, whose item was this?
That was mine.
Okay, go ahead, Peter, give us the
That
pitch.
was mine. I just noted that it's, well, to quote, private and public non-vehicular recreational activities such as hiking, riding, fishing, hunting, and other recreational activities, etc. And I suggested putting in the word non-motorized in front of riding. because there's a lot of riding that is becoming motorized these days. And I don't think that has a place.
Is anyone opposed to that language change? Go ahead, Judith.
The only thing I would offer is that this is, includes both private and public areas. And so I would caution you against going too far with non-motorized. That might conflict with other policy areas that we have in the city. So I might suggest that staff come back with a recommendation on this. I didn't have time to in the time we had available. I get the sentiment. I just think that there are some areas where we've allowed for non-motorized riding intentionally with purpose to get more people out on the trails that wouldn't otherwise be enjoying them, except for the sake that they have a pedal assist bike.
So keep that in the bike rack and bring it back. Okay. LU1D.
That was mine.
Okay, Judith.
As I keep saying, a policy to streamline review or provide ministerial review and approval in the infill opportunity zones is something that I would only recommend as a clear policy statement once we know what ministerial and what streamlined actually mean. And I've been urging us to have that discussion for quite a few months. We haven't gotten to it yet. And until we do, I think it would be unwise to include this as a policy and put it into our plan at this level. And I would urge us to have that discussion before we have any more proposals like this, because until we do, we don't know what we're calling for in such a policy.
Okay. Thank you, Judith. Does anyone else have a question or comment about this item?
I think it's good point.
So we're making it gray to be talked about in the future, or what are we doing with it, I guess?
We're on the LU1D now. The previous items that we couldn't resolve have been turned gray and gone into the bike rack.
Right. I was asking what the proposal was that we do with this item. Is bring it back in the future?
My suggestion is that we have that discussion quickly, although we can't do it tonight within our time frame. I think this is too important to simply stick it in a bike rack, and that we actually spend some time on this policy, perhaps in our gateway as a model for other areas, but hash it out before we adopt the general plan.
If I might, the specific recommendation and the reason why it's in this section is because it was to change the language to say consider adopting instead of adopt streamlined review. So currently the policy says adopt streamlined review, make it ministerial in these infill opportunity zones. That's our goal, to make sure that these zones have ministerial pathways. This would change it from to do that to consider doing that. So that's the specific change that's requested here. So.
Okay, consider doing that, but I don't think this is something that we can ignore until we get around to our bike rack. But having it as
I don't know how to resolve under the framework that you have. You either make a decision now, which would be to change the language to consider, or you would put this in the bike rack, have that discussion, and then come back to it. So those are your options.
How does the commission feel about making the change to consider, which changes the impact of that statement? Is anyone opposed to that language change?
No, I think it's a good goal.
Okay.
But
If no one's opposed, then let's make the change to considering and maybe do one more, as it's 7:40 now. And I know we've got a meeting tomorrow night.
Okay, LU1J, encourage Valley West growth.
Who's got the pitch for this item?
I think that was mine. Let's see. We've already identified that as an infill opportunity area, and I don't know what the point is of separating that out and going through that as a separate item. I think we've already indicated that that's something that would go in for all of those infill opportunity areas.
Anyone on the commission opposed to that language?
I would need to look this up, and we'll do this real quick, but I think each of the areas where there's an infill opportunity zone, this kind of language is in there.
Well, I guess what would work is if we list the identified infill opportunity areas, then have a policy for all of them and not have separate policies for individual zones.
Sort of citywide.
For the isn't there 4 opportunity zones, aren't there?
Yeah, it wouldn't be
Yeah.
citywide, it would be for, and that's the point of these opportunity zones, it seems, in staff's mind. And so one policy, I think, would suffice for all of them unless we really want to treat each of them in a unique way.
I want to take back a little bit the statement I just made. I'm not seeing the same. I'm not seeing the same policies for each of the infill opportunity zones, and I'm just looking at it quickly. But I do know that part of our objective here was to really shine a light on the Valley West area, which historically hasn't received as much attention as some of the other areas. And so we do have LU 1B that is promotion of infill development and designated infill opportunity zones. It talks a little bit about it in that policy. Streamlined reviews and standards in infill opportunity zones is LU 1D, which we just discussed.
I think my concern was about the streamlining rather than its identification as an opportunity zone.
Yeah, and then LU 1J was to encourage Valley West growth as a major community center for North Arcata, so to try and emphasize the Valley West. So the question, I guess, is whether you want to remove the comment and content around having high density residential use in the Valley West. If you did want to do that, you'd probably want to take a second look at the land use map, which is intended to densify commercial areas, industrial areas in the Valley West. So it's kind of a major policy change.
Yeah, and my concern is about making such a change with streamlined approval, which...
Can I suggest we do the same thing we did with the other one and put some language about consider streamlined approval for high density development?
That's what got us to it. It's the same concern about, we don't know what streamlined approval is, so yeah, if it worked before, it should work again, right?
Yeah, is that...
We will revisit.
Can we put consider in?
You absolutely can. And, you know, I guess my caution to you is putting, you know, policies that say consider doing this when you've actively been pursuing streamlining, you know, starting with the housing element, you're starting to kind of, you know, loop back on it. So I might suggest that you, before making that decision, you might want to put these into the parking lot, have a longer discussion about them, and decide definitively whether you want to say, yes, we are going to streamline these areas, or no, we're going to study this at a later date, and when this comes up, we'll have this discussion all over again. So it kind of gives you the policy underpinnings to do the kind of work that we're proposing in the Gateway area, in some of these other infill opportunity zones, as we've been discussing for the last 5 years.
I guess one of the confusions that I layer onto this is that we have the form-based code in the Gateway area and not in these other areas, and so I get confused about what streamlining means in those other areas. So if we could at least update what that means to you, to staff, what the process would look like, I think that's roughly what
we've been talking about in the infill opportunity zones is to come back around with another set of form-based codes, or more objective design standards. Some of them the gateway it lends itself to complete revitalization, redevelopment in a lot of the land uses. Some of the others, the Valley West, for example, I think there's a lot of area for growth out there, but not as much, areas that could be considered, blighted. There are some areas that may be considered blighted, but there's, a lot of opportunity there. And so really the streamlining may look slightly different in each of these different areas, but this is in recognition of the state's, laws that have, that are basically driving us towards ministerial review of these properties. So streamlining in general is to try and form up in each of these different zones some level of infill development that is ministerially approved, and for other areas where maybe there's not ministerial approval, where there's still discretion, that's based on some objective standards.
Can I make a suggestion then for this policy and for all of the infill zones is something like develop objective standards for
to enhance streamlining.
Well, I wouldn't even mention the word streamlining here. I would say develop objective standards for review and approval of high-density residential use in the whichever areas we're talking about it, because it appears that unless we have those objective standards, we're not going to look at streamlining unless the state forces us to. And so I don't think that we need to preempt or second guess the beefed up state streamlining policies, which are going to probably hit us before we even adopt this plan.
So
let me just say that the word streamlining it connotes an intent and a meaning that we're trying to make the approval process easier and less bureaucratic. So it does send a message.
But it sends the wrong message, because what we need to look at is a local policy which will allow us to set objective standards. Chances are the state is going to force us to streamline anyway.
So I just want to make an observation that none of us are sticking to our 45-second objective. These might be parking lot issues because they seem a little bit more complex.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it to me.
I think we're going to get through this one pretty easily, though. Just the little bit that you just gave me helped a lot, just in the last few minutes of discussion here.
So what I'd offer is that I'll take this information. I like the addition that Commissioner Mayer provided of developing objective standards. We'll try and work that into and really redefine what streamlining means in the context of these. If you'd like, I'd pull LU1D from bullet number 4 back into this and bring those back in a parking lot. We'll make sure we get back to these because they are critical and central to some of the decisions you're making. Does that sound like a fair? Yeah. Okay.
Agreeable.
Okay.
I'd like to cut things off. But we were going to finish land use at 7:30.
Okay. So the balance of these, then our parking lot issues, will be moving forward with our remaining topics in the next meeting as we move forward. I think we've done good work. I feel like we started going faster through these policies, started getting a groove. I think the conversation started devolving a little bit as it's getting later and we're slowing down, I think, proving the point. And so we'll structure these so that we're bringing these back when we get to those bike rack issues. And I would appreciate feedback and suggestions that you may have if you want to provide them now quickly, so that everyone can hear them, and then otherwise send them to me in email, and we'll try and firm up the process and do better next time.
Go ahead, Judith.
There were still a number of issues here that I don't know should be parking lot issues. They included the issues about the
well, we're gonna pick this back up after the sea level rise.
So the intent, okay, I just want to be real clear. The framework says that we complete our review of whatever is on that agenda. So for right now, we've got land use and vision for tonight's. The next meeting you'll be picking up, I believe it's circulation and mobility. And so the idea is that you are, actually, let me double check the schedule for that. I don't think those are the topics now that I'm thinking about it. But the objective is, or the idea is that you complete that topic on the night that it's scheduled. Anything that you don't cover in that night goes into the bike rack. We move on to the next topic and move on to the next topic and move on to the next topic. When we get done going through all of the topics once, we then go back and start picking up the bike rack items. And so it's going to be important for you to think about which of these bike rack items is most important to me as a commissioner, what's most important to us as a community. What do we need to talk about when we get to that bike rack? We want to start with those policies first. So the intent, the way that the framework is written, is not that you will start your next meeting with land use. You've covered land use, you've gotten as far as you can possibly get. When you get to July, your first meeting in July, however much you've covered, the council has said, we want you to make a recommendation. However much you've covered, your recommendation is going to be, these are the policies, these are the components of these documents that we've gotten to and made a recommendation on. Here are the changes that we've made. There's this whole body of work that we have not yet looked at. We haven't made a recommendation on this, but this is our recommendation going forward, that you consider these. The city council has made it clear they want to start weighing in on this policy document, the work that we're doing here. They want to see a recommendation. They want to be able to provide some direction and feedback. This is the way, and I understand many people have said, look, there's no way you're going to accomplish all of this. I still honestly have hope. We started out working through process, and it was very clunky, and we had to figure out what it was that we were doing. I feel like we're starting to get a rhythm and starting to get a flow, and if we can keep to that rhythm and flow, remind each other, not feel abashed to, interrupt someone and say, I'm sorry, I get what you're saying, we need to move on, or, you've taken your time, let's move on. If we can keep reminding ourselves of those, I think we're going to hit a rhythm. We're going to get to the policies that we can get through quickly, and that'll save time when we get to the bike rack. We may have more than just the June meetings to get into those bike rack items if we can get these things running.
Would we have the choice? I assume we would have the choice at some point to schedule a special meeting because we really want to get back to just bike rack issues? Like it's just a bike rack night?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we talked about that.
I agree 100%. I mean, if we take the rest of this up in June, we're not going to remember what we said. We're not going to remember what the discussion was about. It seems slightly nuts to me to not have enough time to get through everything, even expeditiously. And we've proved tonight that even expeditiously, we have a lot of stuff to do.
So just really quickly, in regards of an outward-facing component, and I guess also, an outward-facing component documenting what is in the bike rack, what is in the parking lot, how is that going to be presented?
All of the bike rack items would come back to you either in June at the 2 meetings that you have scheduled for them, or at special meetings if you choose to schedule them.
Can staff start developing like a spreadsheet or something like that. That's like kind of a working doc. Yeah, but you know what I mean? That, so we can be revisiting it and seeing it populated in real time as we start moving forward and seeing how far we're falling behind and how much stuff we're going to see come June, or when do we, or like we have so much crap on in our bike rack or in our parking lot, we need a special meeting. Because now we have 150 topics that, you know, that is just being set aside to discuss later on.
Yeah.
Because we got 6 pages of stuff right there.
Yeah, and we got through 4.5. And half of those go, and that 4th page go into the bike rack already.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a qualifier, you know, so then we know, like, hey, we're in the danger zone. And when you start, you know, thinking about special meetings.
I can build a table into your staff report that updates you on how many numbers of policies there are. Not all policies are obviously going to have the same, you know, level of detail that you have to get into them, and so, but certainly we'll do that. And then when we get to this last piece here, the last section is, you know, these items for discussion. At this point, there's really no recommendation, which is why they didn't make it into the other section. So this is really just starting from scratch, a conversation. What I would encourage you to do, if you've made one of these and it's sitting in this list, items for discussion, formulate a recommended proposal for change before we come back to the bike rack so that we can use our time efficiently.
Go ahead, Judith.
Yeah. There are a number of things that I probably could have recommended a proposal for, but it did seem that actually discussing it rather than simply coming forward with recommended language would make a lot more sense. It doesn't mean they're any less important. We never got to talk about the agricultural resource section at all, and we have not addressed the areas that have been proposed for zoning changes, which I think is the thing that will rile up the public most and most specifically. I don't think those are things we can park, whether it be in a bike rack or a parking lot, and expect to go away. It appears that if you want a recommendation on anything without addressing those specifics, what we're doing is kicking it down to the city council, who will probably not want to take up the minutia of those policies. So it does not make sense to me to go on to the circulation element before we have finished discussing things that reasonably need to be discussed in the land use element.
So your options are to modify the framework and make it so that you finish one element at a time, meaning that you may not get to some elements at all. You could schedule special meetings and cover the material using more time in the time that you have, adding more meetings. Or you could prioritize the policies differently when you get into the meeting and say, I'd like to have these items at the top. When the framework right now, as it's currently written, says that when you submit your comments to me, when you submit your recommendations for change, they will be prioritized according to that framework. That's how they were prioritized on this list today. And so if you want to change the way that you prioritize those, then that's up to the commission to do. Recall, it took us about 2 hours to get through that framework. If you want to go and revisit it, again, you probably want to schedule a special meeting and not take up valuable time in your special meetings to go over those.
Go ahead, Peter.
I think the framework is great, but to add to something that Christian said, we are in the danger zone. We have too much work between now and July. We just do. And we need to have more meetings. I mean, we need to talk about these things, as Judith was saying. You know, we have a lot to do. And yeah, I recommended in my letter when I was gone that we have weekly meetings. Don't shoot me, but You know, I think we really need to. I
hear you, Peter.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Judith.
I hear you, Peter. Also, as volunteers, we signed up for bi-monthly meetings. And what I would suggest is that we ask the city council to reconsider that extremely unrealistic deadline for us to do a responsible job reviewing and recommending updates to the general plan.
I think the council said what they said because, first of all, they're impatient, and second of all, the citizens are impatient. You know, we've been at a lot of this stuff for a long time, and yes, it's kind of a crisis. I mean, I jumped into the deep end of the pool here. It's kind of a crisis time, but I'm willing to put the time in if I need to. I just think we need to.
It'll be interesting to see when we hit the ground running at our next meeting on circulation, if we can actually get through it that night and feel like, oh, okay, we can do this.
I mean, I think we made progress tonight, and we're much more efficient in our discussions than we have been at times. And I think inevitably we're going to have items that we don't get to in one specific element, like land use this evening. I think that's just going to happen. I think that was why the bike rack sort of got established. I think we all realize there's going to be stuff in the bike rack. The question is sort of how do we deal with it? I'm open, certainly in addition to the meetings we have scheduled for the bike rack, scheduling more meetings to deal with those items. But I'm hesitant to rebuild this framework after just trying it for one sort of meeting. I think there's other ways we could address the backlog, and we'll see where we get. Go ahead, Matt.
I had suggested at our last meeting that the bike rack be sort of agendized for every meeting. And so if by some miracle we finish an element quickly, we could just start talking about the bike rack in like the last hour of the meeting and hopefully chip away at things in the bike rack as we go and not save it all for a final 2 meetings. And I highly recommend we do that.
The way that the agenda item, the agenda topic is listed, it's all encompassing. You'll have areas that have new material that you're focusing on that will be attached in that. This is going to be a running list. And so you'll have it available to you at any time. If you get to a point in that meeting and you've completed what all the new items are for that particular agenda item, you can certainly go to the bike rack at that point.
So it's something we don't have to make special preparations for. We can jump into at any point. If we get through an element, we can pull up bike rack items.
That'll be the idea.
Yeah, I'll say one more time. I think we need to finish the thing that is in our forebrain first before we go on to the next thing. I realize that's not what the schedule says, but you know, if we need an extra meeting to do that, I think it's important that we do that. I think if we consider this 2 months from now, it'll be much less efficient and we will not do as good a job.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but that's a departure from the sort of framework we agreed on. So that means maybe reassessing there. And I don't want to put that onto the next meeting and sort of get further back in redoing an approach. So whether it's a special meeting for dealing with items that we couldn't get to, or a special meeting to rethink how we're dealing with items that we're not getting to, one way or another, it kind of leads to the same thing, which is extra meetings.
Or we have a 1-hour meeting next week where we finish this.
Right. Judith?
Or we go a little bit later this evening and finish it, or we ask the city council to reconsider their unrealistic deadline so that we can actually finish the work that we're here to do.
I want to see how we do when we hit the ground running on a new topic with 3 hours in front of us next time.
Yeah, we've only tried this. This is our first meeting trying this. I'd like to give it a little more of a run before we, decide to come back to the city council. But I'm open to the fact that we may need, special meetings one way or another to address what we're trying to do. Go ahead, Christian.
I was going to say, we probably should give it a shot one more time and see how successful it is. And every section is not going to be as difficult as the other section. You know, land use is huge, planning commission, planning, land use. So I feel some other sections may be a little bit more easy to get through, where in which then if it is, you know, we can return to the bike rack or the parking lot when we have that free time. That might be appropriate, and then we reassess. I say we give ourselves a timeline and reassessing, like maybe 1 or 2 more meetings, and if it's not functioning the way that we expect it, I feel it's prudent that we go back to the council and discuss our issues and tell them that they're unrealistic.
Judith?
Many people believe that the land use and circulation elements are actually the most important elements of a general plan. We've been pushing off work on the land use section for months, and now we're giving it short shrift. I believe that we need to give appropriate attention, especially to these 2 elements, because they are so central, and that it does not make sense for us to put aside the land use section, forget what we were working on, and then come back to it later. I'll also simply mention that I will be gone for the month of June. So for better or worse, nobody gets to hear my comments about the bike rack or parking lot or whatever it's called during that month. I know some of you may be very grateful for that. But nevertheless, I can't imagine that any of us is going to really remember what we wanted to say about something that came up in May, sometime at the end of June.
Might offer that I'm starting to hear the comments, you know, additional comments to, or, you know, positions, additional comments to support positions, and you may want to, you've got 2 proposals on the table. You might want to use a framework to resolve them. One is to give the framework a little bit of time and see how the next couple of meetings go. The other is to provide a recommendation to the city council that the timeline is unrealistic and you need more time. And then I think the third I heard was to have additional meetings scheduled, maybe one as early as next week. And so I would run through those quickly to see, you know, maybe a radiance of agreement, because I think you've already got a diversity of opinions. You know you're not going to get full support, and that you all respect the ground rules that you'd adopted, including being willing to accept the majority position and move on.
So given that, let's use our gradients of agreement. And how does everyone feel, or is anyone opposed to continuing to try, give this at least one more shot next meeting where we can hit the ground running on the next element? Is anyone opposed to that? So given that, we will give this one more try.
And then additional meetings? Sorry, additional meetings, do you want to discuss that even as an option to see how people feel?
I mean, I'm open. I think we are all agreeing that we're going to have to do special meetings at a certain point. I think my preference would be to at least try this once more and see how far we get, see if we can get done the next element, and then come back into some of this stuff before too much time goes on. And if we need to schedule, you know, more meetings, then we can do that.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, just to help facilitate your conversation, I'd also point out that the April 22nd meeting that you already have scheduled, the 4-hour meeting on Saturday, April 22nd, which was intended to be a workshop on the form-based code based on the old scope that we had, will, I believe, be able to be completed in much less than 4 hours worth of time. And that's an opportunity for you to, you know, pick up and run with the next items. I believe right now we have, they're not on, I'm sorry, this schedule is outdated, but I believe we have room within that April 22nd to come back to the bike rack. Commissioner Mayer will be here at that time. So you can pick up, prioritize land use element.
Go ahead, Judith.
In a conversation with David over the last week, I suggested that if we do have time during that April 22nd meeting, that we go through some of those proposals for ministerial or streamlined approval, in part because it was actually Ben who actually suggested those three options that we could explore at that time with a facilitator and without the extreme time pressure of an evening meeting.
Pat?
That to me is the most important bike on the bike rack, and so I highly recommend that we do that at that meeting as a first thing on the bike rack.
So we've got some time to try at that 22nd meeting. We're all going to give this one more shot. So let's come prepared to do that next time and see what we can do.
I just want to make a light pitch. Our next meeting's April 11th, correct? I like the Tuesday pattern. Throwing in a Monday is a little random, and so I'm just throwing out to the group that if we need to start thinking extra meetings, I'd rather do Tuesdays in between other meetings than some other weird day. So like the 18th, we have the 11th and the 25th of April already scheduled. If we at least in pencil
Keep
thought,
with the Tuesday schedule.
Yeah, I
as
like the
opposed to
Tuesdays.
Back-to-back nights.
There are conflicting meetings on some Tuesdays, but I'll work that out and get back to you. And we'll see if we can have those other conflicting meetings go to other rooms if we need to.
Okay, then I appreciate the work we've done this evening. Remaining items from this evening's meeting will be placed in the bike rack. We'll get to them as time allows with existing meetings or regular or additionally scheduled meetings. We will move to correspondence and communications. Do we have any correspondence from Planning Commission members? Do we have any correspondence from staff?
Not at this time, thank you.
There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.